Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. I think very few people can dispute that. And this has been the theme and should be the theme of all Zimbabweans. After 44 years, the country is in a serious economic and political situation. We should all be hands on deck to find out the way out of this mess. The longer we leave it, the deeper and deeper we sink. I'm so pleased, and so I'm pleased today to be finding somebody who has taken this issue with the seriousness and urgency the matter demands. I'm talking of Professor Lumumba. And in this video clip, he's talking about the difference between a leader and merely a politician. Let's just listen to him for a minute.
Politicians. I'm very reluctant to use the word leaders when I make reference to most African politicians. They occupy positions of leadership, but they are not leaders, most of them. First of all, the intention with which they enter into leadership is the problem. They seek office because they love power and privilege and opportunity that it provides to them. They want to become wealthy. And the easiest and shortest avenue to wealth in Africa today is public office. With the minimum effort, you become a multi-millionaire. They go there in order to be worshipped. And they go there not to do the right thing. And once they have been in office, they do so many wrong things that it becomes dangerous for them to leave office. So their continued occupation of office is also to ensure that they enjoy immunity that comes with office. But when you are a good leader who does the right thing, you do not fear to leave office because nothing has changed. And I've seen leaders of that ilk in this part of the continent. And there are quite a number of sprinkling of leaders who have left office and are doing great things. Joachim Chisan.
Well, we in Zimbabwe have not been that lucky. We have had the misfortune of having the leaders, the very leaders that he was talking about, who get into power for the sake of enriching themselves. Here is President Emmerson Mnangagwa. He is widely believed to be one of the richest men in Zimbabwe. Here is Professor Jonathan Moyo talking of Mnangagwa and his wealth.
Are you corrupt?
No, in fact, this is laughable, seriously laughable. First of all, this is an accusation coming from the most corrupt politicians and public officials in the history of our country. They cannot account for the assets that they have. The richest individual in the Republic of Zimbabwe is Emmerson Mnangagwa. The one person who was responsible for setting up Zanu PF companies when he was the Secretary for Finance of the ruling party is Emmerson Mnangagwa. There is no cent that comes from those companies, including a bank, including investments in the region in countries like Namibia and even South Africa. The person who led the plunder of resources, even in foreign countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, leading to the United Nations investigating and coming up with a report that is still there, is Emerson Mnangagwa, along with the military cabal of General Chiwenga, SP Moyo, the person who brought the Chinese to plunder Chiadzwa diamond resources for Zimbabwe, up to a point where we have, at the very least, over a period from 2007 to 2014, some 12 to 15 billion dollars in diamond revenue that remains unaccounted for, that went into the pockets of individuals. These people have staged a coup, not just to grab power for the sake of grabbing power, but in order to cover up their corruption. That command agriculture was nothing but a looting scheme.
Well, I think the issue of we have corrupt leaders is beyond dispute. Professor Lumumba also talked of how once these individuals become corrupt and they've enriched themselves, they do everything in their power to stay in power at all costs. This was more graphically illustrated in Zimbabwe's case in 2008. And guess who is leading the electoral coup that took place there? None other than Emerson Mnangagwa.
2008 patakaita ma-elections pakaposa papinda Tsvangirai ndandiri election agent ya president. Ma-results abuda tiri party headquarters, vamutasa vanga vari secretary vedu ve-administration. Vamutasa muripi ndafona ndiri kwarusapi komo kwenda kwarusapi seka ma-results achibuda kudai vanga aiwa zvako izvo Mnangagwa ndezvo zvako endaenda kumusha ofisi vanga vabisa zvinhu zvavo zvose watofunga kuti zani yadini yaparara. President ofona zvakamira sei kati ndomamira zvakaita takatodini katida sei manje mama ndikati abvudzai baba nditaure navo baba gadzirai politburo cabinet musarangarira zvimwe zvinhu gadzirai chi cabinet. Asi nangoda kuti muzive kuti 2008 ma-results abuda vamutasa vakatiza.
As a country, we face a generational transition. Vana vesa vari kuma below 35, they are crying out for help. The country is in a mess. Arusurufaro. We know we are inheriting a mess. We know this country has been left with nothing.
I'm assuring you that starting from tomorrow, you'll see a different nation from what you have seen or read on the news about these results and everything. Where we are going ahead there, the situation will be very different. What we said to our people, they could not see with their own eyes. We are going to act as we see it fit. We are prepared to go the whole distance.
Professor Lumumba was right. These people, the case of Mnangagwa and company, have stayed in power for now 44 years and counting. They've become addicted to power. They have shown that they're prepared to kill to stay in power. And they have killed to stay in power. This account would not be complete if one was not to also admit that we did have the opportunity to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. We let ourselves down. In 2008, credit where credit is due, SADC refused to accept Zanu PF as the winners of those elections. And the consequence was that the regime was forced to go into the GNU. That was the golden opportunity for Zimbabwe to implement the democratic reforms. SADC was the guarantor of the global political agreement in 2008. And South Africa's Minister Zulu was the appointee of SADC. Seeing to the implementation of that agreement. She did her best to remind Morgan Tsvangirai and company to implement the reforms. Not even one token reform was implemented. Not even one token reform was implemented in 5 years. Why? Zanu PF, Robert Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and his friends with the trappings of high office. And the rest was history. Zimbabwe has had the misfortune of having the first tier of leaders, the Zanu PF, since 1980, who turned out to be incredibly corrupt and greedy. The nation thought they could change this. And so they went to the second tier, the MDC. And unfortunately, they too have turned out to be corrupt and incompetent and utterly useless. This has not helped the country at all. What has made our situation even worse is that the voters themselves have not been smart enough to accept the reality on the ground. That the opposition, after 24 years, including 5 in the GNU, had failed to implement even one token reform. That the opposition had been participating in these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. It's not rocket science. And yet the fact remains that our people have failed to realize what was going on. So in our case, we have had a double whammy. We have had corrupt and incompetent ruling party leaders, and we have also had equally corrupt and incompetent opposition leaders. And to crown it all, we've had the misfortune of having an electorate that is incredibly ignorant, naive, and gullible. You would think that the people of Zimbabwe had learned something when they realized that they had worshipped Robert Mugabe and his Zanu PF colleagues soon after independence. They were untouchable. But 20 years down the line, the penny finally dropped when people realized that Zanu Mugabe and his friends were corrupt, incompetent, and murderous thugs. The people should have learned at that point not to trust the nation's politicians so blindly as they had done with Robert Mugabe and his Zanu PF colleagues. They should have been more shrewd in electing the opposition. They were not. Morgan Tsvangirai and company have turned out to be corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless. But that was not the end of it. The very fact that the people have failed to realize what was going on is inexcusable. Even to this day, it is disappointing to see how many Zimbabweans who participated in last year's elections, believing Chamisa would win, Triple C would win big, believing that Chamisa's promise that he had plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes was true, turned out to be, of course, a lie. But even then, even now with the benefit of hindsight, it's disappointing that millions of Zimbabweans out there still do not want to accept that Chamisa lied. They still don't want to accept that Chamisa is corrupt and incompetent. Even after 24 years with not even a token reform implemented, they still do not want to accept that the MDC is useless. Here is a video clip I've often played. Chamisa being cornered.
Ende patakasangana na Trump akatibvunza naye akomana mari yamuri kuda kuti nyika ifambe imari.
Serious questions were raised about your behaviour in Washington, D.C. You did see some senior people on Capitol Hill, some Congress people, but you also claimed that you'd seen Donald Trump. You claimed you had a conversation with him in which you said he asked you how much you needed to move the country forward. You told him $15 billion, and he said to you that he would provide the money if you won the election. That was not true, was it?
Sangana na Trump akatibvunza naye akomana.
It was not true that you'd seen Donald Trump and that Donald Trump indicated to you that he would provide, if you won the election, $15 billion.
All those statements were said by other people, not what I said.
Well, no, because there is a video which shows you at a rally in January back home in Zimbabwe saying that Donald Trump had pretty much promised you $15 billion. To be clear, because some people in Zimbabwe are still confused, you're now telling me you did not meet Donald Trump.
We did not.
The issue here is we have, as a nation, have to accept that we have not had quality leaders, both in the ruling party and the opposition. The evidence is there to speak for itself. Our failure to accept the evidence on the ground is at the heart of why we are stuck. There is no doubt in my mind that come 2028, if Zimbabweans do not participate in the flawed election in the same numbers as they participated last year, SADC will deny Zanu PF political legitimacy. And thus putting us on a roadmap to ending this Zanu PF dictatorship. But I'll be the first one to acknowledge that persuading the so-called Shamisa Chete Brigade that it is political suicide to keep participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that they are flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, you are only giving Zanu PF legitimacy. Persuading them that it is suicidal to do so is not going to be easy. They believed Chamisa last year, idiotic lie that he had plugged the vote-working loopholes. That speaks volumes of the kind of people we are dealing with here. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done, but it's going to be a serious challenge. Think about it. Thank you very much for those of you able to join me this afternoon, and have a good day.